shelter in time of storms. Praise the Lord. I'm on. Praise the Lord. Well, I have not. The question was, have I heard any more from my friend Jason? And I have not. So I'm waiting to kind of what's happening over there. It's about a 13-hour difference between us and them. They are 13 hours, probably about 12 hours, 13 hours ahead of us. So when we were, I haven't got the latest yet. I'd mentioned just the email that I received this morning that militants and police came into his church while they were meeting and arrested many of the people, a lot of the people, and him, and took him to the police station. He was released later, and that's the reason I got the message later. And it sounded like most of the people had been released, but they had threatened them and told them they couldn't meet anymore and hold any more church services. And the ministry that he had, I think I'd mentioned to you when Jason came, when I met him for the very first time at the Doctor of Ministry program at Asbury, he had been up near New Delhi. He went to the birthplace of Hinduism, where the Hinduism religion was actually, or not even religion, but belief system was invented in the town. And it's a major city in India, and he really felt like the Lord said, I'm calling you to be an Apostle Paul, to go to an area where there's not any other work. And so he went up in the seedbed of atheism, or what kind of worship. Hindu has all kinds of millions of gods, and it's different. When I met him, he had started 5 churches. He went home that year, and through some support of people in our seminary group, when he came back the next year, they had 29 churches. And then his goal when he came back, when I met him this time, he says the goal between then and there were 100 churches. And he had almost reached that goal. And they would bring in pastors from Bible college and pay that pastor $100 a month and $50 a month for a house. And then every pastor had to start 3 churches. And then he opened up this last year, since he was with us, opened up an orphanage and has over 100 kids at the orphanage. And you can go on his website, or not website, but Facebook page, and see all of it. It's amazing what God is doing there to reach the community, and he's become such an influence in that area that all of a sudden the authorities are taking note of what's happening. And so it's a good thing that wonderful things are happening, but it's not a good thing to be persecuted like he is. So please remember Jason and his family. And he noted on his note just the day before that his wife, they'd been trying to have a baby, and she had miscarried 5 times. But she was pregnant again, and she was 4 months along, and the doctors put her on complete bed rest. And she teaches at a Bible college nearby, has to drive to it. But so he was concerned about that, and now with this other persecution, some challenges. Well, I want to talk to you about some, last few weeks we've been talking about lessons learned, and we talked about China, we talked about Korea and some of the experiences I had there. I know you probably in your travels and where you've gone, God has given you insight and given you wisdom, and you've learned some lessons. Following my time in China and Korea, I met Paula in Rome. And Rome's familiar to us as believers because we have a book in the Bible called Romans. And if you'll turn over there in the book of Romans, right there in the very first chapter, Paul is saying that he's longing to visit the Romans in chapter 1. He says this, "First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is being reported all over the world. God, whom I serve with my whole heart in preaching the gospel of his Son, is my witness." Now this is down in past verse 9, coming up to verse 10. He says, "It's my witness how I constantly remember you in my prayers at all times. And I pray that now at last God will make a way, or open the way. It may be open for me to come to you. I long to see you that I may impart some spiritual gift to make you strong. That is, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that I planned many times to come to you, but have been prevented from doing so until now, in order that I might have a harvest among you, just as I have had among the other Gentiles. I am obligated both to Greeks and non-Greeks, both to the wise and the foolish. That is why I'm so eager to preach the gospel also to you who are in Rome. I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes, first for the Jew, then for the Gentile. For in the gospel of righteousness from God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last. Just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. Aren't those amazing words that Paul is writing to this church in Rome? And tradition is that Paul, went there later and, of course, was in prison, but the church began to grow, and Peter was a major influence in Rome. Peter lived there for a while and ministered there for a while and helped start that church. But what an amazing statement that I am under obligation to preach the gospel to you. And Rome and Italy has been a major force for the church for thousands of years, really, since the beginning, after Constantine was emperor and on into modern day is a major focus. I've got some slides, and as we go along, I'm going to see if my clicker that is having problems, it may shorten my sermons a lot. Aha. Lessons from Europe and Italy. And Paula is going to come and just share with you a little bit. She happened to come along with me. We met in Rome, and she had some interesting experiences there as well. And she's going to give you just some of the lessons learned and insights that she's had.
Well, one of the lessons that I learned, I think before I even went, was just in prayer. As I was in prayer for Alan being gone, and then began to pray about my journey, I was a little bit fretful. For one, I don't travel a lot, and I've never traveled outside the country, and I had not ever done this, especially alone. And so there was a little bit of anxiety. But I remember in one of the last prayer meetings that I had with the prayer group on Sunday morning, they prayed that I would be a witness and be used by God wherever I was. And one of the things that I experienced along the way was on my first one of the first flights was I sat next to a lady from Lincoln, Arkansas, and discovered in our conversation that she lived next to her grandmother, who was a Pentecostal lady that she had gone to church with. But you could tell she had strayed a lot of her life, and that she was not necessarily going to church now, and she didn't expose that till a little bit later into the conversation. And so anyway, the prayer that was prayed over me before I left kept coming back to my mind, that I would be used by God wherever He placed me. And so I thought, you know what, I've got nothing to lose here, and so. Within the conversation, I began to, ask her more and more questions to kind of see why she was stuck where she was. And, well, they're so legalistic and all this kind of stuff. And I said, okay, well, are there other churches in your area that you could, well, there is a nice little Baptist church down the road and all this kind of stuff. And so as it came back around, I explained to her some of my background, and then I began to probe even more. So, what has kept you from being in church other than that? Do you have a good reason? And so, long story short, before I left, before we got off the flight, I said, you know what? Let me encourage you to get back in church. Go to the Baptist church. Go to another church if that's what it takes for you to encounter God again. But there's really no good reason for you to sit back and use that for an excuse any longer. And she just said, I think God has put you here next to me on purpose. It's like somebody might have needed to say that. But it just reminded me, I had one other encounter, but I want to save that for the other part of our journey, because that was a little later on our journey. There's some conversation. But one of the things I noticed when in Rome was I have a love for history, and I have a love for God, and I found both of those there in great measures, And even the conversations of the people giving the tours and stuff had a healthy respect for the whole Christian dynamic and faith and part of their history, whether they were believing Christians or not. They were embracing the very historical facts that Christianity was part of the very foundation and fabric of their country. And so then when you look at the acknowledgement of that, you look at the Colosseum, you look at these major events, the Romans, you talk about the Romans road, you think about all these elements in Scripture, and you see it in real life, from the ground up still. It was a pretty neat impact as far as my Christian faith too, because here again, it's always neat. I love to read Scripture, but it's also neat to see it come off the page, and in real life. And so, I think my takeaway from Italy was the fact that there was such tremendous Christian impact. But the sad part of it was now so many of those very things that impacted their culture from the very beginning of time there is now the very thing that they just use for a money-making tool with no relationship with God. So it was like emptiness. Yeah, we acknowledge, but they did embrace their Christianity. Not like when you come back to America and, everybody's trying to discount our Christian foundation, right? Well, they embraced that as part of their history, and I'm going, that was a little bit refreshing to me to go, they're not walking away from it. That's a part of history. So we can hang on to it in that element and build off of that instead of letting society try to wipe that from our memory banks or from our culture. So anyway, and I think one of the other things God taught me is, my mother passed away not long after we got back, and that it just reminded me that God is so good about giving reprieve. Like, I needed that reprieve, I think, before what I experienced. And God is so faithful in the way He prepares us in our journey from one location to the next. And so it was a tremendous experience. And I'll let Alan give history. He's much better in the details. I just went ooh, ah, and took lots of pictures. So.
Paula was a trooper. I was so impressed with my wife that she could stay up and even stay ahead of me at times. Get up early and stay up late. There's several things that we did in Rome, and I'm just going to give you a little family vacation tour. Is that okay? And then kind of throw in some lessons along the way. When I got to Rome, I got there late at night and took, from the airport, took a bus and then hooked into a train and drove a train into a place called Nomentana near the Tolente area, and then had to take another bus to get to the Nazarene church, which is on the outside of town. And this is the Nazarene church there in Rome that a number of our people have gone to, and the daughter of Randall Beatty at Cersei's church lived there for several years as she's working on her doctorate, now has an apartment in another part of town. But it's Cesia del Nazareno, and it's an amazing place. A woman pastor, Angela Serrata, is the pastor there, and they have the church in the main floor, and then the upper two floors are apartments. Staff lives on the second floor, and then they allow visitors who come through Rome. If you need a place to stay, it's basically about $20 a night for a room. So, it's not bad. And so you see Paul outside the gate. Everything is locked in. It kind of reminds me of El Paso, that everything had gates on it, locks on it, and it was all locked down. And this is out looking over the balcony outside of the upstairs part to show you what kind of the city was. Most people lived in apartments. One of the first things we did was to go to St. Peter's and the Vatican. And you've seen pictures of that where the Pope is. Vatican City is a city all unto itself in the heart of Rome. Just about 44 acres or so is the size of that city. So it's not a huge place, but it has world impact even today. And so it is a sight to see because it's part of the heritage of the Christian faith. One of the things that was interesting when I arrived in Rome, I told you I got there at night and made my way to the church. Rome, for me, was a very difficult city to get around. I typically don't have a lot of problem with directions, but it seemed like every place in Rome, I always made the wrong turn. It didn't matter where I was going, I always made the wrong turn. And so that night, trying to make it to the church, I got off the bus in the wrong way and happened to meet a guy. Matthew was his name in English. Mattis, and he got off the bus with me, and he's standing there looking at me, and I'm looking at him because I'm in the middle of nowhere. I didn't know what to do. And I'd got off a stop too early. Well, I didn't understand the bus. I didn't understand anything for the first few days. And Paula will tell you that, to her chagrins. And it was interesting, and he finally looked over in broken English, said, "Are you lost?" And I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "Are you American?" I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Well, I'm from Rome. How can I help you?" And I'm trying to find the Nazarene church. Well, I don't know where that is, but I said, "I'm looking for Talenti." "Oh, I know where that is." And he looked at me for a minute, and then he said, "Follow me." Okay. So I'm pulling my suitcase and my backpack, and I'm loaded down for bear, and we walk about a half mile in and out of streets and alleyways and all kinds of stuff. And through the course of events, he brings me to the front of this church I showed you. And we got talking, and he said, "Well, tell me, what are you? Who are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm a pastor." "Oh, really? Well, tell me about what that is and about my church and that kind of stuff." And then the more he began to talk, the more I realized he had something about him too. And finally I said, "So are you a Christian?" He said, "Yes, I am. I'm a Baptist here in Rome. And the Lord help me help you tonight." So I thought that was kind of a neat little serendipity thing. Fascinating. Well, one of the first things we did was to get up and go to Rome. She got there at 7 o'clock the next morning. We went to the Vatican and began to look around. And this is a statue of St. Peter that's right outside the Vatican. And it's a beautiful, beautiful setting, originally designed by Michelangelo. Bellini came back and redesigned it later in the 1600s. And that's the main building, St. Peter's Basilica. You see in the background there with the church inside, and it's surrounded by those walls, and there's statues of all the saints and the apostles all around, and beautiful fountains. Rome is the city of fountains, and they're all naturally. They don't have pumps in them, which is amazing to me. They're hooked to an underground water source, but it has such pressure, they say, that it pumps all the water up in the fountains, and so it's a natural place for fountains. And you can see another side. That's part where you can look. I keep pointing back, but I'm pointing at what you're looking at, okay? That is where the Pope steps out and gives his address from that window up, and that's his apartments right there at the top section there. And you see the other side of that Vatican circle. When you go to the Vatican, one of the fascinating things is to go into the Vatican Museum. And it's amazing. It's just it's the collection of all of the things the popes have collected ever since the popes were around. And so you walk into these museums, and they've got just the most beautiful art, Raphael, and all of the ceilings are painted. Some of them are faux painted, where it looks like it's relief and it looks like it's sticking out from the wall, but it's just the artists were so amazing. Then others are just, they're gold, they're gilded, they're amazing what they're like. A tapestry, the size, some of these tapestries would probably fill up that entire wall on each side of our sanctuary, and that people would spend literally their whole lives making these tapestries. That was their livelihood. They made this one tapestry. And so you have the Lord's Supper, you have one of Jesus bursting out of the tomb, and this is bigger than life, 2 times my height. It's huge. Jesus is. Another one of the resurrection, and these are just gigantic tapestries that have been commissioned and people have made. There's art, and you can see other ceilings as you go through these beautiful settings. It's really too much to take in. It's just, you just kind of go and you gaps. How many of you have been to Rome? You've been to the Vatican. So you've seen these, haven't you? Does anybody want to come up and help me do this? So you might be able to add some things more than I have. One of the big things you do when you're in Rome is go to Sistine Chapel. And the Sistine Chapel, you're not allowed to take photographs. You can buy photographs, you can buy posters, those type of things. But it's such the artwork is so delicate because it's done by Michelangelo. The ceiling, the whole story of the Bible, the Last Judgment on the back wall. It's not that large of a room. It's, the ceiling is kind of like our ceiling as far as height goes. And the width of it probably is only from about where I'm standing right here to that wall. So but it's long. And so it's not a very large space, but it's a very significant space. It's where the Pope has his chambers right outside that chapel. It's where the Pope is, the cardinals come together to vote on the Pope, to elect the Pope. And out of above the Sistine Chapel, they have the smokestack. Have you heard that? Where they have the smokestack, and when the Pope is elected, the smoke comes out a different color, what it is. The funny thing about it is the Sistine Chapel has no chimney. It has no smokestack. And so when they're voting on a pope, they have a fake smokestack that they go put on the Sistine Chapel because they're afraid if they had a real smokestack, they might burn the chapel down. And that's happened in these buildings. And so it's kind of an interesting thing. Apparently at one time that had a chimney and things caught on fire, so they said, we're not going to do that anymore. Hundreds of years ago, but it's a fascinating place. One of the big things you do when you go there is to go to the Basilica, St. Peter's. It used to be the largest church in the world. Now it's one of them, but it's an amazing place. The artwork, the decor, the richness, it's opulent by any standards. And the artwork, this is the altar where the pastor's doing communion and preaching, and Bernini, I guess Bernini made that, and it's got a big giant dove, the Holy Spirit above it, and it's really overwhelming when you go in there. Here's the Pietà that Michelangelo did. When I went 40 years ago to Rome, it was out in the St. Peter's, and so you could walk all the way around it. And a few years ago, they had somebody break one of the fingers off, and so now they've put it behind glass. But it's just such an amazing work of art to see Mary holding Jesus as he comes down from the cross. Outside, you see the Vatican, the St. Peter's in the background, the Basilica, and the fountains. We left there and began a tour of just getting around Rome. This is a monument to Victor Emmanuel, who Italy has a unique history that we have a history that goes back to 1776. That's when we say that's when we were formed as a nation. Or we go back to 1492 when America was discovered. Italy's history actually goes back to 1861. 1861 is the birth of Italy, is when all of the states finally came together in this civil war. And Victor Emmanuel is the one who brought all of these city-states together to form what we would say is modern-day Italy. The time that was before that, when Italy was a nation, or not even a nation, but the only time before that they were ever a unified body was under Roman rule. And that ended about 500 AD. And so they have this huge monument. It's the monument of the unknown soldier. And so they have guards out there. And then just some of the statues everywhere. It's amazing the numbers of statues and the beautiful works of art on all of the buildings. Close by, really just down the street from that, is the Colosseum. The Colosseum was built in 72 AD, and it took about 10 years to build. It was built by Emperor Trajan, and it was built as an entertainment. At first, it was a lake that was there, and then they drained the lake because they used to do wars on it, battles. You've probably heard that, where they would have ships out there fighting each other for entertainment. They drained the lake, and they built the walls up on the Colosseum. It would hold 80,000 people. It was built in such a way that it could be completely evacuated in 30 minutes because of all of the stairways, all of the seats. It's really a work, a masterpiece of art. It was where the gladiator fights were taken care of. We got some conflicting information. Our guide said that Christians were never martyred there. And then I've heard a lot of other stories when they have been. And so you may know better than me, but I'm confused right now and conflicted on that. This is the outside of one of the sides of the Colosseum. It's the only side that still has marble on it. All of the buildings and all of the ancient buildings in Rome had marble on it. These were seats that have been taken off, and now you see the slopes and you see some of the areas underneath. This is the only place in the Colosseum that still has the original seats that are made out of marble. And I'll explain what happened to the Colosseum and the other buildings around Rome in just a moment, because it's kind of a fascinating story. This is one of the original staircases that's still there. And you can see they used a small brick. And the Romans, the soldiers, were tremendous engineers and builders and could do about anything, and amazing architecture. And virtually most of the buildings made in Rome are made out of bricks. This is the floor of the Colosseum as you look down in it. You used to have a wooden floor on top of it and then covered with sand, and then they'd have the gladiators and the animals all underneath, or they would do shows. They'd have elephants and tigers and all kinds of stuff come out for like a circus. But it was a huge place. This was the fast lanes, the movie theater, the aqua park, you name it, it was that. The bowling alley. This is where entertainment was, and it became a point. And you've seen movies and you've read stories. It became a point of viciousness after a while, where entertainment needs and taste literally went rampant and crazy. Where people, and we did run into a gladiator, and he did threaten to cut my wife's head off. I had to fight him, and I won, and so she's still with us. We left Victor Emmanuel's monument from the Colosseum and walked across the street, and just right across the street are the Roman ruins of the forums and the buildings, and they're just, it's the imperial fora, a lot of the columns that held up marketplaces, and these were major places of commerce, major places of gathering all around, and you can see different things. And ancient Rome, if you've been there, is still there. Here's one of the marketplaces, one of the forums that business was transacted, a market center, and everywhere you go. This is an arch of triumph, basically, of Constantine in 312, when he went to the Middle East and literally defeated the armies that were there and defeated those around Jerusalem, and it was a pretty vicious leader. And if you see some of the reliefs that were carved into the side of it, you see. Jews today will not go to this site because it actually shows Jews being killed and taken captive, and Jerusalem being sacked. And it's not a popular Christian place or a Jewish place by any means, but it's as far as history, a work of art. And then you go right down, and you're back in the Roman area, where all of this is where Julius Caesar was, and Trajan and Hadrian, and all of the beautiful architecture. What's fascinating is ancient Rome was really pretty much preserved until about the 1500s. So if you would have gone to ancient Rome in 1300 or 1400, you would have seen all of the buildings intact, or most of them. You'd seen all of this actually a functioning area. When the Christians came in and took over Rome and made it from Constantinople back to Rome, the capital city, and the popes began to build up the churches, they began to go to these ancient pagan sites and ancient Roman ruins or buildings and begin to strip the marble and the gold and the bronze and all of that off. The majority of materials, I understand about 85% of all the materials used to build the Vatican are from ancient Rome. So I told you about the Colosseum and all the seats that are missing and the marble from the outside of the Colosseum. It's still there. It's just on the churches. It's on the Vatican. And it took so much money to build the Vatican, they couldn't afford it, so they took it from all the buildings and repurposed it. A fascinating story, and you can just see, and you can walk all down there amongst that. There's a kind of a walkway or a road you can see down on the ground, and that is the Roman road that was there at the beginning of the millenniums. I mean, back in 200, 100 AD, that was the road that was there. And then these are just all baths and houses and palaces and all types of things. What the Christians did, and when the Christians came in, they took what the Romans had created and basically sanctified them. Prayed over it, dedicated it to God, and then built churches at it. And this is a church, an old Roman building that a church still meets in. They have service in. The difference is it actually, that is the second floor of the building. The building actually has another floor underground that has been filled in and built around. And a lot of the buildings in Rome are that way. We went to one church that you could go about 4 stories down and go all the way back to ancient, 100 AD, before pagan temples and things like that. And this is that Roman road that's still in use, and it's the original cobblestones that the Roman soldiers put in. You can see the streets in Rome, and it's a modern city, and yet not so modern. I mean, it has both. It has the ancient as well as the old all mixed in. It's a city of fountains. It's a beautiful city with all the statues. This is, does somebody know what this is? It's called the Pantheon. The Pantheon, it was built originally in 27 BC, and then it was rebuilt or restructured in about 121 AD. And it's an amazing, amazing place. It was an ancient temple. It was built by Hadrian, and it's called Pantheon, which is pantheos. It's built to all gods. And so it was a place to honor all gods. And when the church came in and took over and began the Christian influence, then it was converted into a church and still has services today. This is the dome. It's in one solid wall up around the dome. That opening right there is 21 feet across. Ancient Rome, they would build their buildings and they would not put windows in them because of thieves. But they would put a hole at the very top of the roof for sun to come in. And when it rains, the rain comes down, and then there's the floor is sloped to the middle, and there are holes in the floor that runs down into the city drains. The architecture is still a masterful piece of engineering, and a lot of people still can't figure out how they built it because it is just pristine, and the sound in it is amazing. And that is all basically original from that 100 years. Some of it's been updated and changed. And you'll see right here, that's the altar that's in it today. And they have worship service on Sunday. And you see the priests. And while we were there, the priests were getting things out for a mass and that they hold in this. At one time, the Pantheon was covered with marble. The roof was covered with gold and bronze. And it had all types of precious gems around it from the Roman era. And once again, all of that was taken off, and you can find it in churches all around Rome today. Fountain of Trevi. This is a fascinating fountain back in, I think it's about the 1800s, maybe the Pope had this fountain built. And it actually is... has all to do with the Roman aqueduct and the creating of the aqueduct, the building of the aqueduct, and then the decision to cover up the aqueduct. And this is where the aqueduct in Rome was accessed. It's underneath this. And all of Rome has this amazing waterway. This water is pure, and you can drink out of the fountain. All through Rome, they had water fountains, and it was all potable water. One of the things we did on the last day, I thought it would be kind of an interesting thing to do, and then it turned out to be pretty creepy, and that was to go to the catacombs. And so we went down outside the city. Roman law says you cannot bury people in the city because of disease and things like that. And so they would take people out and bury them in these catacombs. And this catacomb, the ground there is kind of almost like a volcanic pumice, and you could dig down in the ground, and it's very soft. And now it's hard as a rock. I mean, it's stone, but when they dug it out, they could just chip it away and just easily, almost like moving dirt out, soft dirt. And they would build these, and when the air hits it, it becomes hard, kind of a pumice stone. And what they would do is they would bury this. You would have a family chamber, and each one of those slots is where the family members would go. And then the bones would be there, and they had other family members in there. There's a lot of stories about Christians, during the persecutions, hiding in the catacombs, and a lot of the historians are going, they don't think that's really true because you're going to have rotting bodies, dead bodies in there, so you're not going to meet down there necessarily. But it was a place that the Christians would bury their dead at the time of the persecution, because if you were known to be a Christian, your body would be burned, and they didn't want to have that done. And so they would hide down here. And there was a church in this catacomb in a main area. And this is just one of the hallways. You see all of the places where people were buried. What happened, and the reason those are open, those catacombs, when you go see them today, is because people used to be buried with their possessions. So they would have gold, they would have silver, they would have precious stones, and that was theirs. And in Roman custom and the people's custom of the day is they would take it to the grave. And so grave robbers through the years would go in there and bust the graves open so they could get their things out. The same thing if you look back at the Colosseum, you look back at those ancient buildings, you'll notice they have pock marks all over them. You know, the Colosseum was that way if you notice. There's holes all over. And when they built the Colosseum, they used these iron pins to hold the blocks together. And they would drill these holes, 4 holes, one on each corner, and put these iron pins in. Well, as they were building the city, or iron was a very costly commodity, they would go in there and sneak in at night and chip out the stone and take the iron out and then take it and sell it. So there's a lot of black market stuff. Paul, you want to add something else in Rome? Paul was right. One of the things we saw in Italy, which I think kind of got us a little bit, was the plethora, the multitude of churches and religious symbols, and yet it was almost like the people were numb to it. It was part of them. It was part of their heritage. And I heard some of the best preaching I've ever heard from the guides that would take us around, talking about the resurrection, talking about who Christ was, talking about just everything about grace and faith. And then they would get down to the end and say, well, but I believe this. You know, some of them would. And it was quite disappointing to hear that. But at the same time, Paula and I were thinking that people are coming from all over the world, and God is still letting his message out, even from maybe a heathen or a heretic, but his word is going forward. And I have to say, what we heard was true. I mean, they were quoting scripture, and they were telling people, and people are hearing that even today. So I think God is using that type of thing as a blessing to others of what he's wanting to do. We left Rome and we went to Florence. And Florence is an amazing city. One time it was the capital of Rome for about 8 years. It's a city of arts. It was the city where Michelangelo was from. The Medici family ruled or oversaw Florence for many, many years. And it was built, rivers around it. It had these beautiful bridges, and they would build on the bridges to keep from being attacked. One of the major sites in Florence, if you've been to Rome, you've probably been to Florence, is the Uffizi. Uffizi is the Italian word for offices. And they made this gigantic building on both sides full of offices for the government, but very quickly the person in charge, the leader of the town, the mayor of this little state area or governor, turned it into a museum. And so it became a major place for the arts and beautiful. Michelangelo has his things there, Raphael, you name it is there. Here's a statue of Galileo, and all around are statues of famous men. Same type of thing, artwork on the ceilings and on the walls, or statues everywhere. You've got in there beautiful rooms and paintings from all the major artists in the world. And Florence was or is the art capital. You can see some statues and other paintings there. A beautiful woman looking at them right there. This is a statue, actually a portrait of Michelangelo, of what Michelangelo looked like. This was made of him in later years. And this is one of his statues that he made of the slave, or trying to break out of the rock. Michelangelo always say that he didn't ever really carve a statue. He let the marble tell him what he was going to carve, and he literally just released the statue in so many. This is one of the few paintings of Michelangelo besides the Sistine Chapel, and it's a huge, huge painting. But you see once again with Michelangelo, he's a sculptor, so everything he painted was like a sculptor would paint it. And he literally created the real fresco. The way he painted the Sistine Chapel was a unique way of doing it. That the plaster was wet, and he painted onto the wet plaster, and the paint dried in the plaster. And so that's the reason it can last, hundreds and hundreds of years. There's a statue of the Pietà, same type of thing, but it's a rough version. And Michelangelo was asked, "Aren't you going to finish these?" And he says, "They are done. They are finished." This is what the marble says. That's what the marble does. And it's rough marks on it. And right next to it, this is in the Academy there in Florence, is the 9-foot statue of David. I didn't show you the full statue, just I didn't want to shock you with some of the views. Amazing work of art. Amazing work of art. And there's some things that are just so unique as you go there and they show you the statue. They talk about what he did and how he did it. And it's a feat of magnificent artmanship. But in here, there's, in Florence, this was a place, a governor's kind of a palace, a little, what's the word, kind of a guard tower. And outside of it, there were all kinds of statues. And now it's a museum too. And there were probably 100 large statues out front there. This was my favorite place, besides going to the museums. It's a church of St. Mary of the Rose. It's called St. Mary of the Rose in English. In Italian, it's a little different name. But a beautiful church made out of marble, and there are 3 different colors of marble there. There's a white, there's a green, and then there's a mauve or a rose-colored marble. And it is just a work of art to see it. And if you've ever been to Florence to see this huge, massive cathedral, a beautiful, beautiful setting. Here's some pictures of it at night. This is one of the statues, and it just symbolizes, once again, the rule of the Medici family, the rule of the governors over the world, that we have authority, and so you see a statue like that in many places. The next place we went was a place you may know of, Venice. Venice is a beautiful city at night. At daytime, it's not quite as pretty because of the trash, the garbage, but it does not have any cars. It's all motorized boats or personal boats like that. And it's a city that is not very large, but it has 150 canals and 400 bridges. It's an amazing place, and it's like a menagerie to go through it. Paula says, hurry up. Just show you some quick pictures. I'll go a little quicker. No, we didn't go swimming. This is one of my favorite places. It's San Marco Square. And there on your right is the Doge's Palace, and that's the Tower of St. Mark's. And then there's a little pinnacle. You'll see there a column with the lion of St. Mark's on it. Behind that is St. Mark's Basilica. And it's an amazing church, beautiful church. It's all inlaid with mosaics, and the mosaic has gold, 24-karat gold inside of it through the entire church. And one of the things I always wondered as a teen, as I came here as a teenager, spent the summer in Europe, was I went there and I said, well, where did all this gold come from? And they said, well, when they discovered America and they found all the gold down in South America and in Mexico, it came through Venice. And a lot of the gold ended up in the buildings in these places. And it's an amazing work of art. And you see one of the towers, and that is all actual gold there. This is the Doge's Palace. He was the mayor of that area. And so inside of it is a museum. And this was one of the stairways up to the places of judgment. Just an amazing place. What's so interesting around San Marco Square is there's orchestras playing all the time. And so you go in the small little orchestra groups and quintets and bands. And then at night, they have usually a large orchestra out. And then you see the statue of the lion, which represents St. Mark there. And he's kind of the patron saint of that area. Well, some of the streets that are there, and the gondola rides. We didn't take a gondola ride because we couldn't afford it. Is one of those. Lessons learned. I think I was trying to tell Paula that my lessons learned are a little bit different from China and Korea because I went there here as a tourist. I didn't interact with a lot of Christians. We didn't go to churches that much. We went in to visit and tour, and all of our tours take us around. We got to see some Catholic services and some other services, but we were on the go all the time. And so our interactions was really with the people on our tours and our tour guides more than anything else. but to see God still at work in conversations and see him at work in the people, interacting with some of the missionaries there and asking them what was going on. And it's a challenge of dealing with almost an inoculation to Christianity, to have the beautiful churches and the cathedrals, and yet the attendance is waning, is going down. And so I've been praying a lot since we've been back, that the Lord would bring a revival to Europe, that God would bring a revival to literally a place that has experienced God's moving in the past. And yet, what a reminder for us, and maybe just in closing, a lesson that I've been kind of mulling over. I don't think I've learned it or fully understand it yet. But, you've heard the stories that, what Europe is now is what America could be in the future. When the way we think of people dealing with faith and religion. And I look back and I talked with the people that was there and asked the guides a lot of questions and any locals that we met. And there was I think part of their frustration with faith, with the church, was the lack of integrity of leaders, the lack of integrity of faith institutions. And it once again challenged me that as a church, we need to be above repute. We need to be people of integrity, of honesty, and we need to help always steer people in the way of the gospel. And I think that's what's broken some people's hearts, where people have been in authority, they've been in positions of responsibility, and then they've let people down. They've connived or they've taken or whatnot. Well, one of the guides talking about the Pope, and and out of respect, it was different. It was different than what we have. Yes, sir.
Some of the letdown was that some of those people were put in positions.
They can't hear you, Paula.
Just quickly, one of their, I think, disappointments is that they said over history, a lot of times they would put some of the popes and stuff in position for political arrangements and stuff like that, and therefore the integrity got watered down over time. And so what started out to be a thing to bring glory to God ended up the demise of the Christian faith a lot of times. And, that can happen in any place and in any church. But that was one of the things I think we've always got to be on the guard of.
And with any leader, I think we have to be on the guard of it.
Any leader,
Yeah.
that's
But that becomes the example, just like in our generations where some of the other religious leaders become the example. If it's Jimmy Swaggart or Jim Baker in the past or whatever. Becomes the example. And they were very upfront to say, here's this pope, and this pope had 8 illegitimate children, and this pope had 4 illegitimate children, and this, and this one was a good one. And so there's trying to make sense of all of that is a challenge. But the challenge to be people of faith and trust in the Lord is a little bit of a tour, maybe some lessons learned in Europe, but a beautiful place that we just were very privileged to go. Anything else you want to say, Paula? Okay. Father, thank you tonight. And I pray that it was just a little bit helpful just to say some things and show them what we've been doing and what we experienced. Our heart's desire, Lord, in all of this is to glorify you, that you are at work all around the world. We see what's happened in Europe, and we see what's going on there. We know that the gospel is going forward. We know that you are still alive, working in people's lives, and we know that there's a remnant of the faithful, because you always maintain the remnant. And yet we also see those other areas where there's been abuse, there's been misinformation, there's been a lack of integrity, and our hearts grieve over that. And yet we do not have to be ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God to those who believe. We listen to Paul's word, and we take those words to heart as he writes to the church at home and still writes to the church at Rome and the church around the world, that you are the power. The gospel to transform lives. And so help us to be those people, not in our own strength, because righteousness is by faith first to last. And the righteous will live by faith. And so as we go tonight, we walk out knowing that you are with us and we trust in you to lead us, to use us, and to shape us and direct us in your way. Thank you for your grace and your mercy. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. God bless you all. God bless you all. If you have a smartphone and could help me with the church app to do some evaluation, I would love to talk with you before you leave tonight. Thank you very much. God bless you.